contributions to their family and to their communities. And that's what education is all about.
I understand that you're working on a new timeline. Can you discuss that?
Surely. The timeline that Paula Bean and I developed has been an effective tool for teaching African history and culture. It's a long timeline and it's very dense. It has a lot of information. So what I'm going to be developing for the spring of this year is another timeline, which is more of a work of art that depicts our great and mighty walk, as John Henry Clarke talks about, from the beginning of the Nile Valley to Washington, D.C. And it shows the migration of African people in a powerful illustration. And then we will produce a publication, a booklet that explains the different panels within the timeline and gives you more historical context. We also plan to develop a curriculum so that this timeline and the information within it can be used to teach African and African-American history and culture. And all of this will be a part of a new permanent exhibition that we'll have on display at our office building at the Thurgood Marshall Center in Washington, D.C. It's a project dedicated to John Henry Clarke. It's referred to as the John Henry Clarke Enhanced History Project. And the theme behind that is looking at the new National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is a phenomenal museum. But what I found as a historian is it begins our story in slavery and says nothing about who we were before we were enslaved. And having gone to the museum on numerous occasions and watching the audience as they move through the museum, I found that most people know very little about African history, and to dump them into slavery, a reenactment of a slave ship and all of that is psychologically damaging for most folk because they don't have context. And it's such a brutal introduction to our history. So the John Henry Clarke Enhanced History Project will be a prequel to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It will give you context of who we were before our world was destroyed during the Ma'afa. And an essential element of that project will be the inclusion of our Egypt on the Potomac activities that illustrate how the United States was founded based on ancient Nile Valley architectural principles, symbolic, spiritual, and metaphorical principles. We also talk about the importance of knowledge and what I refer to as forbidden knowledge. There is information, there are books that were written by many of our scholars, Edward Scobie, John Jackson, Francis Cress Welsing, Drusilla Dungy Houston, Asa Hilliard, and others. These books are not used in many classrooms, and they're not even used at HBCUs. They constitute what I refer to as forbidden knowledge. And so the last battle that we're fighting right now is the battle for our minds, the battle for our historical and cultural memory. So the purpose of this project and the timeline associated with this project is to, again, reinforce that our history precedes our enslavement by thousands of years. And we have a right and a responsibility to know the beginning of our story and not just focus on our darkest period in American and world history, that is the period of enslavement. So that's how we empower our people, by giving them the truth, the whole truth, and not just fragments of a truth that still limit our ability to know who we are and reach our full potential.
Well, this has been wonderful.